Drop the Mic, episode 4, I believe. And we are at the point where there are no new comedy specials. So we're going to start shaking it up over the next couple weeks. There are a few to look forward to. I think Mark Norman's coming out with one in May. Joe List, I don't think, is far behind him. So there's still some trickling out. But there aren't going to be a ton of new specials to go into in depth with. So I think what I'm going to do is start going through specials that while we're stuck here in the house during the quarantine, you guys can go back through and catch up on. And the ones I wanted to start with today. Oh, we also have podcasts to get into, some other stuff. And then the end segment, we usually kind of critique a comedian's work. It'll be a little different. We're going over something Nikki Glaser did, which I think is interesting. I actually like Nikki Glaser a lot, but I see a worrisome trend with her that we'll talk about at the end of the program. So buckle up for insanity, folks. First, I want to start with Bill Burr's. This is my favorite special ever, other than maybe Killing Him Softly by Dave Chappelle. But I stuck with Netflix specials for this week, and maybe we'll go through all the streaming services and kind of go through some ones you should hit. But I wanted to start with Bill Burr, I'm Sorry You Feel That Way, which is my favorite special of his, probably my favorite special of all time. It's the one in black and white from 2014, if you're looking for it, and you're not sure which one it is. It's his first one with the bald head. And I think it's vintage Bill Burr, and it may be the last great one you see from Bill Burr. This might just be Kirk getting into my head a little bit, but now when Kirk has referenced Bill Burr is kind of getting into an old grump, like maybe kind of losing touch with his audience. I don't know that that's really happened yet, but then every time I check in with him, maybe it's starting a little bit. I don't know. Paper Tiger, his last special that came out in September, I thought was good, but you do see when guys get over 50 years old, they don't connect. It becomes kind of old man comedy. It's just a natural thing that happens with everyone other than I would say it happened with Carlin. I guess Rickles always kind of stayed the same. Like I was introduced to Rickles when he was fucking 80 years old. So I don't know that it really happened with him, but more or less I think it happens with everyone. I mean, look at fucking Eddie Murphy now trying to make a comeback. That's what will be really interesting. Seeing a guy like that who's older and hasn't done stand-up for so many years. But I digress. Bill Burr, I'm Sorry You Feel That Way. I find it to be his funniest special ever. If you haven't seen that, the only reason I threw that in, because Bill Burr's so famous that I assume everyone has seen all of his specials, but a lot of people haven't. I think that's a good one to start with. Maybe you want to start with some of the older Bill Burr stuff, but I think that gives you a good gauge of who he is as a comedian. He talks. It's the one where he talks about that he has a brilliant bit on the church, the NFL draft, helicopters, all that kind of. It's hilarious. So I give that. See, these are all I'm going to give very high scores, but it's tough. I don't know if that's my favorite special ever. Should I give it a 10? I don't think so. I would give it a 9.4 because I like to think there's always room for improvement, folks. So Bill Burr, I'm Sorry You Feel That Way. I give a 9.4. I say check that out on Netflix now. The black and white special from 2014. Other Netflix special you have to catch is John Mulaney. Again, Mulaney's a guy who's gotten pretty famous here, and I think a lot of people know him. But then when I talk about certain stand-up specials you need to see, I'm surprised at the amount of people that haven't seen John Mulaney. I think his funniest special, again, is Kid Gorgeous from God damn it. Was that play? Where did he shoot it? He shot it in New York City. Rockefeller Theater? I don't know. But anyways, Kid Gorgeous is hilarious. I think it's Mulaney's best special. Again, if you have no gauge of who Mulaney is, you might want to start with New in Town. That's how I was introduced to him. But I think Kid Gorgeous is his best special. He is the guy that I give an example of as far as talking about politics, where he has a brilliant bit about Trump without ever using Trump's name. So you get a feel for where he stands, but he's not like a couple weeks ago, I think I talked about Mark Maron's special, where he's just beating you over the head with, "Hey, I'm a liberal." And it's like, okay, we got it. We understand. We know where you stand. Not everyone that disagrees with you is a fucking moron. Uh, Mulaney doesn't do that. I think it's not that it's subtle. You obviously know what he's talking about. But I think it's easier for both sides to enjoy. Like you can blatantly disagree with what Mulaney's saying and still find it funny. So Kid Gorgeous on my rankings would be about an 8.8. And that's one you should certainly check out. Like I said, if you don't know anything about Mulaney, maybe start with New in Town. But for the next Netflix specials, Kid Gorgeous is his best one. And then the other one I wanted to go over on Netflix, if you haven't seen it, is Anthony Jeselnik, Thoughts and Prayers from 2015. That's one, again, you have to see. Anthony Jeselnik is the best joke writer in comedy, I think. And it's amazing that he does a 60-minute special of essentially jokes. No storytelling, really. There's a few mixed in, maybe. But it's basically all jokes. Like, if you're familiar with, I think I've heard Anthony Jeselnik say that one of the guys he looked up to was Stephen Wright. They're very different in approach, I guess, to comedy. But their delivery, you can see some similarities for sure. But Stephen Wright's a guy from Boston who was just joke, 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 joke. That's what Anthony Jeselnik is like. So he fits in, a 60-minute special. There's probably, 80 punchlines or something. So it's amazing what he's able to do. I thought his latest Netflix special was very good as well. Might have been the best one from last year. But Thoughts and Prayers I thought was better. I give it an 8.9, slightly better than Kid Gorgeous, actually. So those are the three on Netflix right now that I think if you're just getting into comedy, or maybe for whatever reason you haven't heard of those guys, I would find that shocking. Those are the three I would start with on Netflix, or maybe if you're introducing someone else, if you're getting your girlfriend into it, those are the ones I would start with. And then I also wanted to say a good place to check out comedy specials is Gas Digital Network right now. Every Saturday night, actually, after you're done watching Mike and the Minifans, I think they do it at 8 or 9. I'm not sure which. But Gas Digital Network every Saturday night now does a free double feature of stand-up. It's kind of a weird model because, I mean, people don't even go to fucking cable TV for appointment viewing now. You can't run on Comedy Central if you're running two specials on a Saturday night. People aren't going to watch it because they could just watch shit on Netflix. But I do think it's interesting the way Gas Digital is doing it, because they're putting out, like, I believe, as we record this tonight, so last night for you guys watching this. But I think they're putting out like a Big J Okerson double feature. So they're putting two of his specials up. They've done Kurt Metzger. They've done Mike Cannon, who I recommended last week. So I think it's a pretty interesting way to kind of promote specials that you wouldn't necessarily see. It's not the Netflix or HBO type of specials. It's the guys who do their first album and maybe record it as well. Though I think they're doing albums as well, where they're just streaming an album, so there's no video element. But it's an interesting way to kind of discover guys. Like, I recommended Mike Cannon last week. Most people wouldn't know who the fuck that is. So they'll have guys like Mike Vecchione, who I've talked about, Louis J. Gomez, who I've talked about, people like that who you wouldn't necessarily know, but this gives you a chance to check out their album or their special for free before you get into their comedy. So I think that's pretty interesting. So check out Gas Digital Network on Saturday nights for stuff like that. And then before I move on to other stuff, producer intern Justin, just informed me that I'm a fucking moron. It's John Mulaney from Radio City is where he did Kid Gorgeous. What did I say? Fucking Rockefeller Center, like a fucking idiot. Yeah, Radio City is where Mulaney did Kid Gorgeous, but very funny. Check all those out. And then again, not a lot of news in the world of stand-up. It's there is, what I'm wondering is when comedy clubs do start opening up. I've heard people speculate because a bunch of states are reopening now, but slowly. Will comedy clubs be open by July, August? I don't know. I'll be ready to go by then if, people I like are back out touring. But are the majority of people? I have no idea. I think it's very possible that stand up isn't back until 2021. I think next week, me and Two Wheel Teddy, my guy Ted, the kid in the wheelchair that'll be pushing around in the David J. Portnoy Memorial 5K. I think he's going to join me next week to talk a little comedy. So we'll talk about more of that kind of stuff with him. But it's a weird time now where there's going to be a lot of guys, even guys that I've recommended, like Mike Vecchione and Mike Cannon, who I've talked about, guys like that, who pretty much just make their living off stand up, but are by no means rich. They're kind of paying their rent on the weekly gigs they do. If they're not out touring for 6 months, a year, are they going to be, what the fuck are they going to do? Are they going to be able to continue in comedy? I have no idea. That'll be interesting to keep an eye on. But maybe I'm just missing a ton of stand-up stories. What I like is what we did in week 1, where there was a little sort of a radio war between Joey Diaz and that Mike from Red Bar. Shit like that I like. So feel free to send me anything, blindmike_. If there's anything you want me to get into. But this week, there wasn't a ton of news I wanted to get into in the comedy world. So we'll just go right to podcasts. And the podcast in general. So what I usually do is give you a podcast in general that I review, an episode that I've heard recently that you guys should check out. And this week, I think I've got a bonus one for you as well. So the podcast that I want to review in general is the Rad Dudecast. This is one I can guarantee you've never heard of, unless you're a real inside comedy nerd like me that scrubs the depths of podcasting. Rad Dudecast is with three stand-up comedians, Brendan Ayer, Anthony DeVito, and Greg Stone. And none of them you would necessarily know. I've seen Anthony DeVito live at the Providence Comedy Connection, headlining. I think he does relatively well. Greg Stone and Anthony DeVito both wrote for Michelle Wolf's show on Netflix. And if you hate Michelle Wolf, don't go based on that. They're very different comics. But these guys are fucking hysterical and weird. It's the weirdest podcast I've ever heard. And I'm on I'm on a world of Minifans. So that understand exactly what I'm saying when I say this is the most bizarre podcast I've ever listened to. It's very weird and silly. It's never serious. This is, and again, I assume everyone listening to this is a Minifan. So I think you guys can understand what I'm saying here. This is one, if you are going to check it out, be ready to not have any fucking idea what's going on necessarily. It's a disaster, but it's hilarious. And these guys are hilarious. And the best way to describe the podcast is Brendan Ayer is the host and kind of the most logical, centered voice on the show. And he's been in and out of mental institutions and shock therapy and all this type of shit. So it's quite literally an insane podcast. They do a lot of weird, silly, childish characters, but it's always I shouldn't say always very funny. There's some episodes that even lose me, but 9 times out of 10 it's very funny, very silly. I would check out the episode 103. They've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, I think, at this point. So I would go way back and check out episode 103. That's where I started. The episode's titled Murderous Greg. I think that's a good place to start. You can also hop in anywhere because there's no, like, the Kirk Minihane Show is weird in the sense that you almost have to follow every episode. This is weird in the sense that there's no rhyme or reason to anything that they do in a given episode. So there's no train of thought happening. You can just jump in wherever and kind of get a feel for what they're doing. I would say if you think you're into that silly, childish, weird comedy, give it maybe 2 episodes. Don't bail after the first one. Maybe give it a shot unless you really hate it. But yeah, check out the Rad Dudecast, and they're on YouTube as well. So you can click right over and check them out when you're done watching this if you want. but they're obviously on iTunes and everywhere else. And then, I mean, as far as an episode, this is why I'm doing a bonus podcast this week, because this feels like almost a cop out. But to ignore this as the best episode that I've listened to recently would be silly of me. The Cullen episode of the Kirk Minihane Show, I think, is the best episode of podcasting. I don't want to sit here and talk about it for 10 minutes because we've already done that. You guys have, I'm assuming everyone listening to this has already heard it. If you haven't, or even if you're behind, I understand people are behind on the show. Listen to that one first and then catch up, because I truly believe you'll love this. I think the people that say they hate it have never gotten the show or are just saying that to kind of get a rise out of people. I think it's brilliant. I've never heard anything like it. Kirk did an amazing job writing it. Steve did an amazing job putting it all together. I think it's, to say it's my favorite podcast episode, maybe there will be a time where I go back and listen. I'm like, I've already heard this, but it's certainly the most unique thing I've ever heard in podcasting. There's nothing to compare it to, because even the best episode of Joe Rogan or Bill Burr or Mark Maron or Corolla or anything, the best episode is a really good episode of their show. This is something so different that I can't think of another. People laughed at. People were saying, I've never seen anything like this. I'm not saying that to be a sheep or a patsy. If you have an example, give it to me, but I can't think of an example of anything like that. But like I said, I'm assuming anyone listening to this has already heard that episode, so I don't want to drone on too much about its brilliance. But I couldn't ignore that that's the best episode I've heard recently. But I'll give you a bonus, and that is a new podcast that premiered during quarantine. I'll warn you, buckle up, because the title is horrendous. Maybe the worst podcast title I ever heard. I hate it. It almost made me not want to recommend it to you guys, because you'll hear the title and think, this is just going to be a douche fest. This is going to be horrendous. But I assure you, stick with me. And even maybe once you hear the names of the people on it, you'll enjoy it. But the name is awful. The logo is not great, but they even shit on that on the show. So it's Louis J. Gomez, Nick Mullen, and Tim Dillon have come together for Bastard Radio, which I guess, I don't know. Tim Dillon and Nick Mullen hate the title, evidently, and they've made fun of Louis, because I think Louis J. Gomez thought that this would be some, I don't know, badass title or something. I don't get why they would name it that. It seems like a lot of people will be turned off because of it, at least in my mind. Maybe I'm overstating how bad that title is, but for me, you get douche chills just hearing it. But Bastard Radio is actually very funny. It kind of originated on another kind of douchey name, but a good podcast, The Real Ass Podcast, where Louis, Tim Dillon, and Nick Mullen would get together. Nick Mullen from Cumtown, Tim Dillon from The Tim Dillon Show, Louis J. Gomez from about 6 other podcasts, including Legion of Skanks. When they get together, they do have great chemistry, and they're very funny together, and they play well off each other. So now they're kind of doing what Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura did with Two Bears, One Cave, where they said, hey, we're all buddies. We have good chemistry. We could do a good show together. We don't have time to do it every week necessarily, because they all have their own stuff going on. But how about every other week? So I believe it's every other Thursday or Friday, I think it comes out. And the three of them get together and just kind of shoot the shit. It's a very funny dynamic, because Louis is usually the alpha on every podcast he does, but Nick and Tim are much smarter than him. So it's funny to see them. Like, for example, Louis thought that Tara Reid, they were talking about the Joe Biden story, and Louis thought that Tara Reid was Tara Reid from like American Pie. And so Nick and Tim just went with it and let him think that and tried to convince him of it. So it's very funny, silly. You get a Steve Harvey impression from Nick right off the bat in episode 2. So check that out. And I think it'll give you a feel for kind of what those guys are. And maybe you'll want to check out their other podcasts. That's on YouTube as well, if you want to watch. So if you're watching this, you can click right over to, I believe it's on Louis J. Gomez's YouTube channel. So go check that out, Bastard Radio. Maybe leave a comment and say that the title is horrendous and they should change the title. But other than that, it's a very good podcast. So check all 3 of those shows out the next time you're looking for a podcast other than the Kirk Minihane Show. Lastly, here, like I said, we usually take time to critique a comedian. Like I try not to shit on comedy because I think there's far too much of that on YouTube or anywhere else, where you find someone and just that you don't like and completely shit on them for some reason. And my theory is like, hey, if you don't like the person, just move on to something else. I kind of take people that maybe I do enjoy or I see something in, and I try to critique them a little bit. Because as Kirk says about me, those who can't do teach. I certainly can't do stand up, but I could maybe help some of these kids out there. But we're doing something a little different this week, where we're talking about someone who I actually like as a stand up a lot, but I see what I see in a lot of people that get too famous, where they start heading down that Hollywood road and they start to change a little bit, and then you've lost them forever. Their true fans lose them forever. And the person I'm talking about this week is Nikki Glaser. Nikki Glaser, you could put into a category like, she's an attractive girl that talks about sex. So I think there are some people that immediately look at her as a hack, but she is actually very funny. Like her specials are funny. She's been funny on the roasts. I think she has a radio show that I'll check out once in a while. I'll usually hear her more as a guest on radio shows, but she has a Sirius XM show every 4 days a week that does well. She's a funny comedian for sure, but she's been thrust into this position where, because she's a pretty blonde girl, she's gotten very famous. Similar thing happened to Amy Schumer. Amy Schumer wasn't necessarily as attractive as Nikki Glaser, but same type of thing where she kind of fit a mold that they could put her in. So all of a sudden she's just very famous. So she was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They rebooted Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with Jimmy Kimmel recently. Bring it up, Justin, because so I just found the clip that was on YouTube, which is kind of the most egregious example of what I'm going to talk about. But really, I didn't want to pull clips from Hulu because I figured they could take us down off YouTube for that. But the whole episode itself that she's on, I would say if you're a Nikki Glaser fan, go watch it, because it's a little cringeworthy, where you start to see her slipping into this Hollywood Nikki Glaser. Before I drone on about it too much longer, I'll just play it and see if you kind of pick up on what I mean. Justin, go ahead.
Okay, we are back on Millionaire. Something happened before the break that has not happened to my knowledge on this show before. Nikki, recap what happened. Tell us what happened exactly.
I was deciding between 1917 and The Lighthouse. I reached a decision with Dr. Drew, which you all saw, which was I was going to pick 1917, but because The Lighthouse we were saying it so much, I just screamed The Lighthouse, and then the words that you're not supposed to say after you say the thing that you don't want it to be the thing of.
All right, so pause.
Now that it's
out. So if you're not understanding what the fuck she's talking about, basically she's like, all right, so we're going to go with 1917, right? And you get like Dr. Drew is there to help her for some reason. And Dr. Drew goes, yeah, let's go with 1917. And she goes, so definitely not Lighthouse. And he's like, no, not Lighthouse. And they were saying Lighthouse a bunch. So she goes, all right, Lighthouse, final answer. But that's not what she meant. She meant 1917. This is all nonsense. I'm getting somewhere. Don't fucking worry. I'm not bogged down in the rules of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So she threw out the wrong answer, and there was this big dramatic thing. No, I meant 1917. They made it very dramatic. I should also point out that her charity was the first thing that really pointed me to Nikki Glaser changing. So obviously they're celebrities, so they're playing for charity. And her charity is, I guess, what they do is a lot of people have pet parrots, apparently, or pet birds in general. However, parrots live for a fucking long time. I guess their lifespan is like 70 years. So if I get a pet parrot and it outlives me, then it's got nowhere to go. So apparently this charity that she's playing for, which she wins like 125 grand for. She won 125 grand for a charity that basically I guess, takes care of your pet parrot after you die, which seems like the biggest fuck you to. I mean, I don't know when these episodes were recorded, so if I'm not saying it should be for a coronavirus thing, but it's like help fucking, I don't know, sick kids or Alzheimer's or cancer or something, like fucking pet parrots that don't have a home anymore. Seems like a bizarre someone who's getting too famous thing to work with. But like I said, it's more her reaction to things that I'm concerned with. So keep playing, Justin.
Out there, it's locked in,
And you were eliminated first on Dancing with the Stars.
I was eliminated first on Dancing with the Stars.
You're in a way
I'm honestly like,
you're cursed by this network. Yeah.
it's really nice that I had Dr. Drew. I'm like gonna cry.
Oh. Well, Nikki, I'm so sorry that happened.
Okay. This is it's a reminder to take things slow.
Yes,
before you
that
speak.
is a good reminder.
And that is what I have learned tonight. And
that is the positive.
Yes.
Now, with that said,
Pause again, Justin.
we do have to go.
So yeah, she starts to cry, and it's obviously fucking ridiculous. First of all, she's not winning this money. It's for some who gives a shit charity that they make fun of throughout the episode anyways, for some reason. But she does this fake crying thing, like she's so worked up. Again, this wasn't the worst clip in my mind. It was just the one that was available on YouTube. It almost gets worse. Like I said, if you like Nikki Glaser, I'd recommend going to watch the episode, because it gets worse where she's talking about boys, and it's just this ditzy thing that was never Nikki Glaser. I fear she's becoming the Hollywood, I'm now famous and I'm a blonde girl that likes sex, and I'm going to talk about it in the way Hollywood is cool with it, rather than the way that got me famous, the way that got me recognized. She's got a show coming out on E, which is what she was promoting. It sounded like she's going to have like a regular comedian friends on. So hopefully it's funny, but I would say keep an eye on it. We may have another Amy Schumer situation on our hands where, 4 years from now, Nikki Glaser is fucking doing a Lena Dunham thing where she's telling us if we don't vote Democrat, we should fucking hang ourselves. Keep playing, Justin. I forget if there's any more. I don't think there is, but let's just play it out and see.
To the judges for a decision on this.
Really?
What were you hoping your final answer would be?
1917.
Now, fake crying again?
Really?
Well, the final answer from the judges is that we are going to accept
that's fine.
1917.
Yeah, she got it right, and she like overly celebrates and everything, which I get. You have to have some performance in, but the fake crying and pretending to care so much. But then if you also watch the episode, because she's also shitting on the charity that she's playing for, it's very bizarre. I watched it with my girlfriend, and we were both kind of like, what is she doing? Because Nikki Glaser was someone I recommended to my girlfriend because I thought it was someone she would like. And she watched this episode and was like, this is the girl you find funny and cute and everything. Like, I don't get it. So keep an eye on Nikki Glaser. I worry that she's becoming too famous too quickly. You see that a lot with people. You see it with Amy Schumer, Pete Davidson in kind of a different type of direction. But you see it a lot in comedy especially. Because with actors, like, who really gives a fuck who they are? Like, I don't know what Leo DiCaprio is like off stage. He's just a tremendous actor. With comedy, you kind of feel like you know the person, even though you don't. The audience has a relationship with Nikki Glaser. And then when she changes and becomes this huge celebrity, you're watching someone that wasn't, and someone that you were never interested in. It's like, why am I still following this person? This is not the person they were. So yeah, keep an eye on Nikki Glaser. Other than that, kind of a light week in comedy. So I would say I've got to do some digging, and the audience of this show, do some digging as well. Recommend some things you want reviewed or talked about here on the show. And we will get to it next week, I believe, with my good buddy Teddy Two Wheels, the brittle-boned fella that was on Kirk Minihane Show and Mike and the Minifans last week. So check that out, and we will talk to you next week on Drop the Mic.